Just as a quick introduction, just a general overview of the beginning of the Parsha, the Torah speaks about the mitzvah of Bikurim, of bringing the first of the fruits from the Shivas Haminim to the Beis Hamikdash as the mitzvah of Bikurim. The Pasuk then goes on to speak about something called Vidui Meiser, which is that after a Yid would take care of his different Meiseros over the first, second, and third year of the Shemitah cycle, and similarly in the fourth, fifth, and sixth year of the Shemitah cycle, so every time, after 3 years, the Yid would need to make sure that he got rid of all of the Meiseros by then. So anything that he didn't do before, he needs to get rid of by now. And there would be something special called Vidui Meiser. He needs to come and speak and say in front of Hashem that I have done all of these things. So starting the Sicha itself, in our Sedra, after the Parsha of Bikurim and Vidui Meiseros, the Pasuk says, Hayoim hazeh Hashem alekacha mitzavacha, on this day Hashem is commanding you, las sachukim ha'elu v'samishpatim, to do all of the chukim and the mishpatim, mishamarta v'asis oisim, you will guard them, you will do them, b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha. Rashi, in his second Dibur HaMaschil, it says on the words, v'shamarta v'asis oisim, and he explains that Baskol would bless him and would say, Hey Vesa Bikurim Hayom, you brought Bikurim today, Tishna L'shana Haba, you should repeat this again next year. Now the reason why Rashi is translating Mishamarta V'asis Oisim is not a command but rather a bracha, even though the simple meaning of those words sound like it is a command, and as some of the other Mefarshim that explain Pshutei Shel Mikra do actually explain, says that it's understood simply as some of the Mefarshim actually say, that since this pasuk Hayoim Hazeh is coming after it was already completed all of the different commands regarding Bikurim and Vidui Meiseros, it's also after the Yid has even done the things that I've said earlier in the Psukim, in these mitzvahs, as Rashi says on the earlier pasuk, Hashkifa memoin kachacha, where the Yid says to Hashem, look down from heaven and bless us, etc. Rashi says, Osinu, we did what you commanded us, now you please give us the bracha. So this pasuk is coming after all of those commands, and the Yid even did it already. Also, the psukim that say after V'shamarta V'asis Oisim are also no longer commands. Rather, it's psukim that describe the praise of the Yidden. The pasuk says, Hes Hashem Marta, you have distinguished Hashem, you have chosen Hashem. V'Hashem Mircha, and Hashem has distinguished you. So therefore, it doesn't make sense to say that the words V'shamarta V'asis that is right in between these commands and the praise of the Yidden is suddenly another command, because then there's no connection neither to the previous psukim nor to the later psukim. And this is why Rashi says, V'shamarta V'asis Oisim is actually a bracha. The Yidden are being benched for the fulfillment of the mitzvah of Bikurim, which then this pasuk, as a bracha, as a reward for the fulfillment of the mitzvah of Bikurim, is connected to the following psukim, which they too are praising the Yidden. The Yidden are zoichet of Hashem ha'mircha, that Hashem has distinguished us, because it's Hashem ha'marta, because we distinguished Hashem. With this, says the Rebbe, will also understand the particular wording of Rashi, where Rashi says that the Baskol says, Hey Vesa Bikurim Hayom, you brought Bikurim today, Tishna, you should repeat it next year. And the Rebbe asks on the word Tishna, why does Rashi use this word? Rashi just said, Hey Vesa, you brought Bikurim, so why doesn't he use the same expression again? So too, you shall bring Bikurim next year. Or use the words of the Pasuk. The Pasuk says, V'asisa oisam, you shall do these mitzvahs. So Rashi should say also, Ta'aseh. Why does Rashi use the word Tishna? So the Rebbe says, but based on what we just said, that this bracha v'shamarta v'asisa oisam is connected and very similar to the next few psukim of Hashem ha'marta and Hashem ha'mircha, which we just quoted, it's going to be understood why Rashi uses this word Tishna. In these psukim, it's Hashem ha'marta, that you have distinguished Hashem. Hashem Mircha, Hashem has distinguished you. The Torah is telling us that the reward that Hashem is giving you is Midah Keneged Midah. Mircha and Marta. That is, because Hashem Marta, because you chose Hashem, the reward is in a similar way. Hashem Mircha, Hashem chooses you. In other words, we're using the very, very same word to describe both things, especially, says the Rebbe, that these words Marta and Mircha, Rashi tells us, we don't even have another word in the Torah that really means the same thing as these words Marta and Mircha. So it's clear that the Torah is using the same term for both, for what Hashem chooses us and us choosing Hashem, clearly bringing out this idea of Midah Keneged Midah. This is also why Rashi says that in the bracha of Shamarta v'asisa isam, which is similar and coming in a similar style of midah connected midah, like Hashem Marton, Hashem Mircha, is not just any bracha. Rashi says, Tishne l'shon haba, you will repeat this again next year. Meaning, because you brought it this year, next year you'll be able to repeat again exactly the same thing. In other words, the idea of midah connected midah, you did it now, the reward will be something similar, you'll be able to repeat it. The problem, however, is, the Rebbe's question now is going to be, why Rashi specifically is focusing on the idea of Bikurim. We said that Baskel says you brought Bikurim this year, you'll do it again next year. The psukim right before this pasuk is the psukim which we said before is about vidui meiser. In other words, there's the dinim of the meiser, and the person is saying that he has done all the meiseros, etc. We're not speaking about Bikurim directly. Although the Rebbe says there is a remiss to the concept of Bikurim as well, there is a mention, because when the person says in his vidui meiser, v'gam nesativ, that I've also given all of it away to the Levi, etc., so Rashi explains to us over there that when we say this in vidui meisers, we're also including Truma and Bikurim, but definitely the main vidui that we're saying is definitely referring to the meisers. And regarding the dinim of Bikurim, that was totally not mentioned recently. That was the parsha, that was the section before the dinim of meisers. So why is it that Rashi is now suddenly going back and saying that this bracha of the Baskel is saying you brought Bikurim now, and that's what the pasuk is referring to, that which was mentioned way back in the parsha, and not to that which was just mentioned, which is the idea of Meiser. Says the Rebbe, even though it's true that in a number of places we do find that a pasuk can be referring not only to that which just said, what was just said, but also to that which was said before that. However, says the Rebbe, it doesn't sound right, it makes sense in Derech HaPshat, that a pasuk should just be referring just to the things that were mentioned 2 parshas back, and not to the parsha just before this one. So again, why would Rashi say that it's referring to Bikurim, which is 2 sections back, and not referring to the Meiser, which is just the last section? The Rebbe says we cannot say that Rashi only means Bikurim as an example, because it's the first thing in the parsha, but he definitely is referring to Meiseres as well. The Rebbe says, because in the Lashon of the bracha, Tishna Lashana Haba, you should do this again next year, the Rebbe says these words actually don't really fit very well with the concept of Vidui Meiseres. Because Vidui Meiseres is not going to be done again next year. This is done once in 3 years. And therefore, it must mean that Rashi is saying that it's actually referring only to Bikurim, not to the Vidui Meiseres. So therefore the question is, why? Why are we only referring to Bikurim and not to Meiseres, which were just mentioned? Says the Rebbe, even a bigger question, to use the expression that people say, a klotz kasha, such a strong but obvious question, all over when Torah discusses the idea of reward and brachas for fulfilling mitzvahs, the Torah says it, and for all generations, that the Eibishter promises reward for the fulfillment of a specific mitzvah that's specified over there, or for the fulfillment of all mitzvahs. The Rebbe gives some examples of this parsha itself. Es Hashem Marton Hashem Mircha. Later on in the parsha, with a very great arichas of Ahoyim Shemoy, when you do the mitzvahs, all the brachis will come to you, etc., etc. So it's just a general idea. You do a mitzvah, and the Eibishter promises, yes, reward will come. Here there's something very, very unusual, a very big chiddush. To use the term that we used before that Rashi says, although it was regarding something else, Ein lo eid b'mikra. We don't find anything similar to this. A Yid brings the Bikurim, and suddenly he has this heavenly voice directly speaking to him, Tishna l'shana haba, bring it again next year. And seemingly, says the Rebbe, even when we learn on different levels of learning, al derech halacha, remes, drush, soid, it's very, very difficult. This whole concept of a baskel, where did it come in from? Whoever mentions anything about a baskel in the pasuk? Where do we even have a proof that there's a baskel over here? Especially that we're speaking about Rashi over here, which is leibasi ala l'pshutei shel mikra. He's coming to explain the simple pshat of the pasuk. So what's going on over here? To explain this, says the Rebbe, we said that in the previous section it spoke about kisachal la'aser, when you finish bringing the meisers, bashana hashlishis in the 3rd year. So what happens is, as we said before, if you did not finish bringing all the meisers when you should have, this is the deadline, this is when you needed to bring it. Says the Rebbe, therefore, if we should say v'shamarto v'asiso oisam, which according to Rashi means you're going to repeat this, if in fact it is referring to meisers, What are we technically giving him a bracha? That also next time he should bring the maasros, not in the time when they're supposed to be brought, not the first year, not the second year, and only bring it and finish off with it by the deadline of the third year. Says the Rebbe, we can't say this. Because number one, says the Rebbe, the pasuk says, "V'shamarta v'asiso oisam b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha." You'll guard them and do them with your whole heart and soul. If you're doing a mitzvah with your whole heart and your whole soul, you're not going to be delaying it for a year or 2 years. Furthermore, the Rebbe says, this word tishna, they are going to be delaying once again to the third year. That's not exactly a bracha. That's the opposite of a bracha, says the Rebbe. The bracha would be if you could actually bring it in the right time. So if we said before the whole idea of Tishna means it's going to be a repeat of what's happening now, that doesn't fit with the idea of Maasros. We don't want it to be a repeat from the way it's this time. We want it to be much better. This is why Rashi says that the bracha is actually connected to Bikurim. In Bikurim, it makes sense to say Tishna, you should repeat this next year. Here it will in fact really be a bracha that next year as well, you'll bring these Bikurim once again, b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha, with your whole heart and soul. Okay, so now once we establish that it's definitely referring to this idea of Bikurim, the problem still remains, how does it flow, how does it fit? With the Vishamarto, V'asisa Oisam should totally not have a connection with the section that we just said, which is Meiser, and should be going back to the Parsha of Bikurim, which are 2 Parshas back. Says the Rebbe, so we must say that although it's true that this last section of Hayoim Hazeh, the section before Hayoim Hazeh, the last section was speaking about Maasros and Vidi Maasros. Nevertheless, the very, very last words, just before this pasuk, there is some special connection actually to Bikurim. And it's in connection to those last few words that now we get that bracha about bringing Bikurim again. What are those words? The parsha of Kisechala La'aser, of giving those Vidi Maasros, finishes off with the words that the Yid is asking the Eibishter to look down from heaven and to bench the Yidden and to bench the land. The last words are Eretz Zovas Cholav Advash, the land flowing with milk and honey. Flowing with milk and honey, as Rashi had already explained in Parshas Boy, refers to milk flowing from the goats in an abundant way. And honey is referring to over here, honey from dates. Says the Rebbe, the Rebbe is going to prove in a second, is more connected to the concept of Bikurim. First of all, the Rebbe says these things are totally not even obligated in Meiser. The obligation of Meiser, B'derech HaPshat, is only for grain, wine, oil, not for milk and honey. More importantly, the Rebbe says, when Meiser is given, Meiser needs to really be given from all the produce. Not only from the very, very special olives or oil, a kind of olive that stores the oil inside of it. The Eretz Zeis Shemen Advash, in other words, a very, very unique type of olive that has so much oil inside of it, or only from Dvash, only from those dates that have the honey flowing out of it. That's what Zavas Chalav Dvash means. So this totally does not fit with the idea of Meiser. Rather, it does fit with the idea of Bikurim. It fits very much with Bikurim. Because number one, says the Rebbe, Bikurim, we bring Bikurim also from these dates, Dvash Tmorim, from these special dates. That's exactly what we give. As Rashi brings in the beginning of the Parsha, where it's and Vayitin Lanu, that the Eibishter gave us a land, Zavas Chalav Dvash. So that's number one, that Bikurim is specifically given from the best fruits. And furthermore, says the Rebbe, the reason why we bring Bikurim is to show that we are not ungrateful for what the Eibishter gives us. And as we go ahead and we say right away that because you gave us this land flowing with milk and honey, etc., that's why we're bringing the best and the greatest from the land, the very first from the land, we're bringing the Bikurim. And therefore, says the Rebbe, even though it's true that generally the section we quoted before of Vidi Meiser is actually not speaking about Bikurim, and in fact, even the words Eretz Avos Chalav Dvash is really not the chiyuv of giving Meiser off these things. We're speaking about a request that we're making of Hashem to bless this land that flows with milk and honey. Nevertheless, says the Rebbe, but since these very last few words, Eretz Avos Chalav Dvash, do have a special connection to Bikurim, therefore, it does make sense to say that the words Hayoim Hazeh, the very next words, the very next pasuk, could actually be a special bracha that the Eibishter is giving for the fact that the Bikurim was brought. Says the Rebbe, however, what's still not completely answered. What's another thing that needs to be clarified? But first, the Rebbe introduces and says the mitzvah of bringing bikurim, as we said before, emphasizes very, very, very much the idea of midah keneged midah. Because Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim, where we were slaves and working so hard, the Eibishter brought us to the opposite extreme, as emphasized in the mitzvah of bikurim, which is Vayitin Lana, the Eibishter gave us a land flowing with milk and honey. And therefore, which fruit do we bring? We don't bring all the fruit, any of the fruit. We have to bring the very, very best fruit. We bring the first fruit of the figs and so on. And so too, we mentioned the idea of midah keneged midah, that the Eibishter acts with us in a way that because we chose the Eibishter chooses us, etc. So the question becomes, in order to show that we were not grateful, and in a way of midah keneged midah, seemingly it would have been enough. V'lokachta, we brought the fruit. We come to the place that Hashem chose, and that will be midah keneged midah. As we said before, Hashem brought us to this place. Because Adam Mitzrayim brought us to this place, to Eretz Yisrael. We are now going to come to this place, midah keneged midah. We are going to bring the best fruit to Hashem and put it down in front of him, midah keneged midah, because Hashem gave us this beautiful land. But then the pasuk goes on and says that the Yid says, "Higadeti hayoyim laHashem elekecha," that I'm coming now and proclaiming and making an announcement. And v'oni, so he has to say it out loud, thanking Hashem for all these things. So what about the midah keneged midah in regards to this proclamation, to this announcement that the Yid is making? Since that's the whole point of this mitzvah. Says the Rebbe, therefore, in Pshutei Shel Mikra itself, leads us to say, and we're forced to say, that there is also some sort of response from the Eibishter, some sort of Yonisa, some loud proclamation coming in response to our Vonisa, to our proclamation, to our announcement. However, we know that there's a bit of a problem with the Eibishter just making announcements to the Yid. We know that when the Yid heard the Eibishter's voice, they started complaining, Ki Michal Basar, who is the one that can hear Hashem's voice and survive? Instead, Moshe Rabbeinu, you go over and you get the messages for us and so on. Moshe Rabbeinu, that's a Navi, or someone like Moshe Rabbeinu, a Navi, could have the words of Hashem, etc. Says the Rebbe, this is why Rashi says that this V'onisa was in fact not on the same level the way Hashem speaks to Moshe Rabbeinu and to the Nevi'im and so on and so forth. Rather, it was a level called Baskoil, which is clearly a much, much lower level. Says the Rebbe, from the Inyanim flowing from the amazing things within this Rashi, this explanation that we said, that the Pasuk Hayoim Hazeh, which is speaking about Bikurim, has a direct connection to the last few words of the previous section, Eretz Zavas Chalav Udvash, fits very much with the way the Alter Rebbe explains this Pasuk in Likutei Torah. There the Alter Rebbe says that these words Hayoim Hazeh, although again it's a new section, are connected to the previous pasuk Eretz Zavas Chalav Udvash, and he says this is expressed in the Rosh Teivos of these words, the last word of the previous pasuk Udvash, Hayoim Hazeh, and the next word is Hashem, so it's Yud Kei Vav Kei. So these four words, the Vav of Udvash plus the two Heys, Hayoim Hazeh, and then the Yud of Hashem's name, altogether these four words are actually a Rosh Teivos. They make up Yud Kei Vav Kei. Because the Vav, again, from the previous pasuk, is connected to these next three words in the next pasuk. Says the Rebbe, just like we explained al derech hapshat, that this pasuk, it connects to the previous pasuk in those words, Eretz Zavas Chalav Udvash, and mainly we said it's mostly connected to the inyan of Dvash, because the Bikurim is mainly going to be from the Dvash, the honey, the dates. It's not so much connected to the idea of the Chalav. Says the Rebbe, the same thing, Al Pi Chassidus and Likutei Torah is also the same idea. When we say that this pasuk is connected to the previous pasuk, which finishes with Eretz Zavas Chalav Udvash, but although it's generally connected to that whole section, but the main connection is again to that last word, Udvash. That's what makes up the Rosh Teivos with the next three words to the Shem Havaya. The Rebbe continues and says, in Likutei Torah, on this pasuk Hayoim Hazeh, discusses another idea, and it says like this: the words Hayoim Hazeh is a reference to Rosh Hashanah. Says the Rebbe, this too fits very much with what Rashi was telling us, that the pasuk is speaking about Bikurim, because just like we have Rosh Hashanah, Bikurim are also the idea of Rashis, the beginning, the first, the head. Furthermore, says the Rebbe, in regards to the difference between Bikurim and Truma, although we know that the Torah also refers to Truma as Rashis, they're both Rashis. Nevertheless, Bikurim come before Truma. And as Rashi actually told us earlier in this parsha already, that it's part of what the Yid has to say, that I didn't bring the Truma before the Bikurim. This is all part of what needs to be done. Says the Rebbe that the Tzemach Tzedek explains in Oira Torah at length in this parsha that the reishis of Truma, when Truma is called reishis, that's a reference to Torah. Regarding Torah, we find the pasuk Hashem Kanani reishis darkoi. But what kind of reishis is that? That's like the reishis of Truma. On the other end, the reishis of Bikurim, that refers to Yidden, Neshamas Yisrael. We have a pasuk about Yidden Kodesh Yisrael Havaya reishis Tevuasai. Just like we know that the Yidden come before Torah, so to Bikurim comes before Truma. And the Tzemach Tzedek explains over there at length that the idea of Bikurim within the Neshamas Yisrael is connected to the very, very essence of the Neshama of the Yid, how he's rooted in the very essence of Hashem, where over there, as we know, Machshavtan Shei Yisrael Kadmol Chodover, the Machshava, Hashem's thought of creating Yidden, in other words, the place where the Neshama of the Yid is, precedes everything, even Torah. Says the Rebbe, now we can understand the connection even more between Bikurim and Rosh Hashanah. Because the avodah of Rosh Hashanah is the idea of Kabbalah soil that's stemming and coming from the very essence of the Neshama. As explained in a number of places, that the Kabbalah soil of all year round is a kind of Kabbalah soil that's lower than the rest of the faculties of the person, but the Kabbalah soil of Rosh Hashanah is a kind of bittul that's coming from the deepest essence of the Neshama, the very core of the Yid himself. And this is the idea of Bikurim. In other words, Bikurim is this reishis, the etzem haneshama, the very deepest part of the Yid's neshama. Another point, says the Rebbe, one of the main ideas of Rosh Hashanah is that at this point is being revealed the atov v'chartonu, where Hashem chooses us, chooses the Yidden, Hashem chooses the Yidden. And as we say in the davening of Rosh Hashanah, we say, Yivchar lanu esnach loseinu, the Eibishter is choosing us. This bechira that Hashem chooses us is again coming because of this level of the Bikurim, this deepest level of the Yid's neshama, the etzem haneshama. Why is that? So the Rebbe explains. The real idea of Bechira is only in a situation, in a way, where it's completely not connected with any sorts of logic, any sort of reason, any sort of reasons why to choose. And therefore we know that the idea of Bechira comes and exists in a place where all of the actions, all of the deeds of the Tachtonim, of the creations, completely have no tfisa smokim, are completely insignificant. The way the Eibishter views it, it's all exactly equal. As the Pasuk says, Ach Esav leYaakov, that even Esav is a brother to Yaakov. They're, so to speak, on par, equals. Both of them equal. In fact, on the level of Makifim, in that all-encompassing light, that's higher than Ishtalshalos, in a certain sense, that's even more shaykh to Goyim, as it's known the idea that Esav was the Bechor, etc. Nevertheless, even climbing to all of these deepest and highest levels, the Eibishter says, but I choose Yaakov. The Bechira that the Eibishter chooses Yaakov is because of the Shoirish of the Neshamos, which is rooted in the very deepest part of Hashem. In other words, this is going back to the idea of Bikurim. This is the Bikurim of the Neshama. It's because of this level of the Bikurim of the Neshama that really who's the Bechor? Yaakov is the Bechor. The Eibishter chooses the Yid specifically. Says the Rebbe, based on all of this, we're also going to understand why Rashi emphasizes in the previous Dibra Maschil on the words Hayoim Hazeh Hashem Elekechem Etzavcha, Hashem is commanding you. Rashi tells us the famous words of B'chol Yom Yiyu Beinecha Chadoshim, that every single day it should be in your eyes as brand new, Kilu Boyim Bayom Nitzavisa Aleim, as if you were mamish commanded on it on this very day. Now, what are we referring to? The explanation, the meaning of B'chol Yom Yiyu Beinecha Chadoshim is that even those days when we are involved in completely different mitzvahs and with other things, learning other parshiyas in the Torah, etc., not even necessarily Bikurim, this is a parsha that's speaking about Bikurim, so we always have to have it in mind as if we were commanded today on Bikurim. In other words, these chukim, these mishpatim that we're speaking about right now, which according to Rashi is speaking about Bikurim, so even in times when we're involved in other things, we always have to have in mind as if Bikurim was given to us right now. And the question is, why? What would be the reason that when we're involved in all other matters of Torah and mitzvahs, we should always remember on this day as if Bikurim was given today? And in a way of Chadoshim, in a brand new way, says the Rebbe, not only Ka Chadoshim, as if it's new, with a Chaf Adimyon, as Rashi brings elsewhere, in regards to Torah and mitzvahs, but rather literally have to remember every single day as if the Bikurim was given today. Says the Rebbe, but based on the way on we explained the idea of Bikurim will be very much understood. All the matters that a Yid does, everything that a Yid is involved in, even when it's avoida that's connected with specific koiches, with specific faculties. He always has to have that bittul, that feeling of that Kabbalah soil that's coming from the very, very essence of his neshama. This is similar, says the Rebbe, to that which is known, that the idea of Kabbalah soil of Rosh Hashanah, which we said again, is coming also from that Bikurim aspect of the neshama. We need to take this Kabbalah soil of Rosh Hashanah and live with it. It needs to shine the rest of the days of the year as well. So that every single day, in all of the matters that a Yid does in his daily life, he always has to be feeling with a complete freshness this idea of the Bikurim. The bittul of the Etzem HaNeshama needs to be felt. The Bikurim aspect needs to be felt in every single one of his avodos throughout the year. The Rebbe says this is as the Tzemach Tzedek explains, what it says in the Tanchuma, that the idea of tefillah, davening every single day, was actually established instead of the Bikurim. Because what's the idea of tefillah? The idea of tefillah connects the neshama down here with the source of the neshama, the way it's above. And therefore, as we need to have tefillah before we even learn Torah. Because in order that our Torah should be proper, we must first have the oidurus of the etzem haneshama, which is the idea of tefillah, which again is compared to the idea of bikurim. Another thing, says the Rebbe, which is understood in Rashi, based on the inner explanation of the idea of bikurim. And the Rebbe says as follows: when a bracha is given, but the kind of bracha that's a haftacha, it's a guarantee, this makes sense to say only regarding those kind of things that are not going to really depend on the choice, on the bechira of the person. Regarding Torah and mitzvahs, there needs to be a vacharta b'chaim, we need to choose it. We also know hakol b'dei shamayim chutz miyira shamayim. So the question is, then there's not possible to promise anything if there's no choice. So what does it mean that a baskil comes and benches, Tishne l'shana haba, you will repeat it again next year? Says the Rebbe, but based on what we explained, that the idea of bikurim is this level of the etzem haneshama, will understand this very well. Because the bracha, what the bracha is doing is, it's about arousing the etzem haneshama. And therefore it's not a contradiction to the bechira, to the choice of the person. On the contrary, once the Yid's neshama, the essence of the neshama is revealed, of course, of course he's going to choose the right thing. He's going to choose life. The Rebbe says, even in Derech HaPshat we understand the idea, just like B'Pashtus. What's the idea of bringing Bikurim? We said before that Bikurim is a way that the Yid is expressing his thankfulness to Hashem, and that he's not being ungrateful, etc. A person naturally is not a kafui toiv. A person naturally is not an ungrateful person. And therefore, again, the assumption is, of course, he will bring Bikurim again. Of course, he's going to be grateful again. The same thing over here. The Etzem HaNeshama is revealed, and then, of course, he's going to do all the right things. Says the Rebbe, as mentioned earlier, this bittul of the Etzem HaNeshama needs to be connected also with all of our detailed and specific faculties. And here, too, this is also expressed in the idea of bringing Bikurim. Bikurim would be brought with physical fruit. And within this itself, as mentioned, we bring it specifically the best fruit, the most geschmacke and delicious fruit. And that's why we don't bring bikurim, for example, from the dates that are up in the mountains and so on. We need to look for the very, very best. Also, what do we do with the bikurim? We don't burn them on the mizbeach. Rather, they're eaten. The koyanim eat them. And it's eaten in a way, as the pasuk says, v'samachta. It needs to be done in a way of joy. In other words, we're taking this level of bikurim, this greatest and deepest level of the shayda shamakar neshama, but it's connected with physical eating. It becomes part of your flesh and blood, and eating it b'simcha. Says the Rebbe, since, as we explained before, the rewards of the Eibishter midah connected midah, this is why the bracha that a yid receives for bringing the bikurim, he's told, tishne l'shana haba, repeat it again next year. In other words, once again you will have very, very good and geschmack of fruit. Once again, you'll be able to have this amachta b'chol hatoiv, rejoicing in all of the good that the Eibishter gave to you and your family. And it says the Rebbe, the same thing is true in regards to the avodah of Rosh Hashanah, which, as we said, this is the whole idea of bikurim. That when a yid is ma'ored inside of himself, this tenuah of bittul and kabbalah soul from the etzem of his neshama, then the Eibishter gives him aksiva v'chsima toiva, shana toiva, mesuk, and all of his ruchniistic things, as well as in his gashmiistic things, for himself and his family and everything that he needs.